thank you so much for coming, and I just want to thank the organizers again for setting up such an awesome conference. My flight was delayed this morning, and so I just sort of almost ran directly here, but I've already teared up 3 times, just how wonderful it is, and I don't know, the community here just seems awesome, so I'm really excited about the rest of the weekend. You have to, yeah.
Yeah, so I just wanted to give everybody a heads up. We have Area 5 here shooting some video footage for their documentary Outer Lands, but no one in the audience is going to have their face on film. It's going to be just for the panelists, so just wanted to give everybody a heads up about that.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think which place to start. I think I'll start with just my initial impetus for this, and then we'll do introductions after this. But the initial impetus for this panel was actually shortly after I joined OUYA as head of developer relations. I reached out to have a conversation with Mattie Brice because I could see this interesting thing happen, maybe not too surprising, but in trying to curate content for the audience and with a need to be financially profitable, you could see quickly the desire to lean into the audience that we already had on the OUYA. So the early adopters, which I think are the traditionally hardcore gamers, white men who are into the genres that we're all familiar with in console gaming. And I was interested in how a company could puncture through that, because OUYA is still, but certainly at that time, was in its really nascent stages. But it also was really eye-opening for me as far as what happens, I think, with any new console and sort of why we get trapped in the cycles of who makes these games and who's playing them, and so then who's hired to make more of those games, and then who's playing those over and over. So I was gathering this group together to discuss this issue, and in many ways, I'm a participant in this conversation more than moderator because I don't really have all of the answers. So with that, I'll introduce myself. I'm Kellee Santiago. I'm currently head of developer relations at OUYA. I'm also a partner in Indie Fund, an angel investment fund for independent developers. And my game design background sort of started with founding that game company with Jagnow Chen and developing Flow, Flower, and Journey with them. So Samantha, you want to?
I'm Samantha Kalman. I'm an independent developer based in Seattle. I founded a company called Timbre Interactive. I'm currently working on a game called Centris, which I have a pocket full of pins if anyone wants one after. And it's playable here on OUYA, so if you want to head up to the OUYA lounge, you can ask to play Centris and you can get set up with the game. I have a background in prototyping and testing from Unity Technologies, so I was QA director there for a while, and then I worked on the Fire phone at Amazon for a year and a half, and now I'm doing my own thing.
Hi, I'm Mattie Brice. I am a games critic and developer. So I've been doing some writing in games media for a couple of years now, and I I guess I just made a game and put it on the internet. Is that what released is now? I launched it officially a couple of years ago, my niche, and that's up in the 5th floor in the Indicate exhibit. And I've been just doing some event organizing and activism and things for diversity in games and also DIY culture in games.
I'm Rob Jagnow, founder of Lazy 8 Studios. Some of you may have played our game Cogs, which was kind of a big hit on everything. And our new game, we had this big successful hit, so we had money to put into a new game, so we made a game called Extra Solar that none of you have played because it's weird and it's really hard to describe, but we're really proud of it because we were given this opportunity to fail and we wanted to do something cool. So that is also up on the 5th floor in the Indicate room.
Oh, cool.
And I have plenty of stories about, working with, trying to get our content into the living room that I will share later.
My name is Hunicke. I was the executive producer of Journey, which is the last game that Kellee and I actually worked on together. I have an independent game company here in San Francisco called Funomena. do 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 do. And I'm pretty active in the diversity sort of area of games. I was the 2014 winner of the Microsoft Women in Gaming Ambassador Award. I was just recently featured in Google's Made with Code initiative, so I was one of 6 women featured trying to get young girls interested in making things with code, and I've been an active voice in trying to sort of raise the profile of different games in our community. So I run a session at the Game Developers Conference here in San Francisco called the Experimental Gameplay Workshop. I've been doing that for 12 years, where we feature some of the world's most interesting and experimental games. So I'm a real advocate of making games that are different. My first game was The Sims, and so I started off with games that were a little different and that focused on values that I could get behind. And to this day, I have never made a game with a gun in it. So that's my goal, is to just keep on increasing the peace as we move forward. So.
Yeah, so one of my first questions, I guess, we all have different experience with games in the living room, and I was wondering what are some of the challenges you guys have experienced in that cycle of creation and identifying who the audience is there. In developing games for the living room or playing games in the living room.
I'm happy to answer that one.
Seemed like
I have some good stories there. Back a few years ago, when I was still kind of new in the industry, COGS had been a big success on mobile platforms. Nintendo was at the Game Developers Conference, and they were like, we really, really want independent content creators on the Wii and on our platforms. And I was like, okay, this is cool. Let's talk about this. And they were like, well, first of all, we need to know, like, which office complex are you in, or do you own your own office building? And I was like, I work from home. And they were like, oh, that's basically a non-starter. Well, what security system do you have? And I'm like, I don't have a security system. And they're like, yeah, we can't work together with you. So it was very clear that there was all this lip service to, we really want independent voices and new stuff. However, we're actually super risk averse, and we're not really serious about this. We're just here to have a presence at GDC. And I think that's changed really fast with people like OUYA, and with Samantha being a launch title on OUYA. I think that these guys can talk about how that's changing very rapidly. It used to be that, for instance, Xbox would have, we're going to release 18 new XBLA games this summer. And every one of them had it was because they had to have all these people negotiating contracts and making sure that you fulfilled their technical certification requirements. And with the Steambox and OUYA, that's totally changing. These are not a thing anymore. And I think that eventually, because of the cool new independent content that's going to come to things like OUYA and Steambox, the big three, Microsoft, Nintendo, and Sony, are going to have to change as well.
Well, what I love what you're talking about is essentially lowering the bar to get any content on these boxes. So I grew up playing Super Nintendo, and for those things, the game developers had to pay for the cartridges to be manufactured. So you're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars just to start that conversation. And now, and I also think Unity has helped in that regard, where trying to democratize game development and make game development accessible to anybody who has a computer, which is also, you need a computer, can do it. And now the publishers and the consoles are starting to pick up on into that ecosystem. They're buying into it and making it more possible for anyone to have games that run on a box dedicated to the TV and a controller.
Yeah, I was going to say that I started off at Electronic Arts, and after working on The Sims for a while, I worked on a Wii title called My Sims, and then I did several games for the Wii, and then moved on to the PlayStation Network with Journey. And over the course of that time, when we started out, experimental games they weren't a thing. You couldn't, the first couple years of Experimental Gameplay Workshop, you would show prototypes and people would think, oh, that's cool, but it'll never be a game. And now, we debuted Portal, we debuted Katamari Damacy, we debuted, Braid. These games came out and made a huge impact. And, when you say we debuted Portal at the Experimental Gameplay Workshop, that sounds really strange now. But, 6-7 years ago, that was considered a bleeding edge kind of title. So what we're seeing is that there's so much more room in the marketplace for games that like don't do the same thing that all their games used to do. You know, it doesn't have to be a racing game, it doesn't have to be a shooter, it doesn't have to be a sports-related title that's super broadly accessible. You can have a game come out like Gone Home that has a huge impact because it's made with love by people who love their audience and want to communicate something, and it can still be mentioned on all the major gaming sites. It can come out, and then the question becomes, how do we continue to push that boundary with new platforms, basically?
Yeah, because I think what you're talking about, especially what I've seen, is certainly on the PC side, there's been an explosion
Huge.
in the last few years of the variety of content that we can play now and have access to. But the console marketplace seems to be lagging so far behind. And even in the operating an open platform like OUYA, I'm still seeing the vast majority of content that gets submitted and published, right, is still sort of covering the same themes and topics.
Safe.
I know about a year ago now when we talked, Mattie, you said something that stuck with me, which is, I wouldn't even have thought of making a game for a console because I wouldn't even thought that was an option for me. And I guess I just wanted to explore that idea a little bit more, and maybe what you think about it today.
Well, yeah, for sure. Like right now, I probably can now entertain that possibility, but before, so when I made my Nietzsche, I didn't even know I could make a game. Like, I didn't know I could be a game developer. You know, like there was just that idea of like, you go through a certain process and that's how you make games and that's how you're like a legit developer. And then I made my Nietzsche, using RPG Maker because I don't code or, know much scripting or anything. And I made it and I was able to like, oh look, and people played it, gets mentioned places. Like, oh wow, I guess I did something. And then when you think about consoles, that just seems like this whole other like thing, like it's like official like video games with like capital VG and I wouldn't know how to program for a controller, I have no idea how to do that, and so it never really quite hit me that way because I'm used to making PC games which are like single player and very small, and when I think about consoles and my past with consoles, I mean, yeah, we have the single players, but you also have your friends that you played with and things. And I didn't even kind of think about well, what are multiplayer things that I would make? And I think very depressing and interesting things when I imagine that. But I'm kind of curious about would a game that is not super fun with your friends, local co-op, is that are we going to be able to go past that idea? Can we have a living room where a game for the living room which is I'm going to have an intimate conversation with you, or are we going to do something that is I need to share a sad moment with you, or I need to share something intense and beautiful but not exciting, if that was a little bit more part of the language of what we talked about with console games, then I could probably translate myself a lot more easier over there, because I'm oh well, I can imagine side by side conversations. I sat next to someone, we weren't looking at each other, and I can imagine the kind of conversations that happened there. And so now that we're kind of having that conversation, I can see myself making something. But before, when we originally talked, I would have been no one would ask me to develop for a console.
It makes me think of the Wii. When I was, my dad bought me Pilot Wings when I was little, and it's hey, here's a game I can play with my dad. But then he didn't actually want it. It was one player, and he thought it was cool looking, and so he took delight in me playing. But then when the Wii came out, I went to a Thanksgiving dinner with many families, and I didn't say anything, but someone else, another mother in another family at the table brought up the Wii. And my brother had brought his Wii just in case. And then this was the time where we were all playing, I wasn't even the instigator. And I've always been the instigator for games in my family. So and I love what you're saying, Mattie, about all these different kinds of ranges, because when I think about my memories of console games, I think about the single player experiences like Final Fantasy 3 or 6. And then I think about playing Smash Brothers and GoldenEye with a group of friends regularly. And so having more diversity of content, have room for everything. I think that I'm so overwhelmed by how there is room for everything. And now the bottleneck is people just need to make more cool stuff.
Well, specifically, you need to get that stuff funded, you know, and I think what happens is, you know, if I start thinking about something that's, you know, personal to me that I'm going through, I'm working on a pair of games right now that are related to sort of, you know, just challenges and things that I went through over the last few years of my life. And one of them is, you know, more, I would say more commercial, it's more traditional. And the other is very experimental. And I think of them as a pair. Like, I think of them as being two sides of the same question that I've been trying to sort of tease apart, which is effectively, why do people do things that they know are bad for them? Which is something I'm really interested in as a person. But like, one of them is pretty easy to pitch because you can describe it. It has a relatively straightforward narrative. You know, the characters are friendly. It's dual coded. It can be played by a child and a parent or a couple, and it creates a conversation. It's intimate, and the pitch is really easy. And the other one is about like sort of looking inside yourself. It's more about a meditation experience, taking yourself out of your head. And the minute that you start talking about it, you just see the eyes. Like, every once in a while, you'll get to that person in the organization who gets it, and you have that zap where you know, all right, this person's going to sponsor my game. Like, they're going to do the prototype. We're going to do this for launch. It's going to be awesome. But like, for every one of those people in an organization, there may be 5 or 10 people who only see the pre-asserted marketing labels for the categories on the store, and in their mind, as I'm talking, all they're trying to do is boop, 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 It's not fitting into any category. Like, how am I going to market this? How are we going to recoup our investment? Where's the money going to come from? So for them, even if they feel the frisson of my amazing idea, and it's a really fucking amazing idea, they have this professional responsibility to be responsive to the marketplace that they perceive on that platform. And in their mind, all that's happening is that little yellow arrow is just going bang, bang, bang. It's not fitting in any category. And for me, the cognitive dissonance for that person is, I empathize with that. Like, their job is to make sure that the money that they give me to help me make this game gets made back by their organization, and it's not a CYA situation where they gave me a bunch of money and the game didn't do well. But at the same time, if that's the place you're in when you're having that conversation about how to get this game done, you're never going to get to the next place, which is where there's a category filled with awesome games that people like me gravitate to, that makes money, where other games can live. And it's like, trying to get over that hump is so hard, you know?
I'm actually going to give a little bit of disagreement there. I think that's the old school way of thinking about games.
But consoles are old school.
And consoles are old school.
They're old
Well,
school.
let's be clear here. Xbox, Wii, and PlayStation are old school.
PlayStation Network is awesome.
Whereas like OUYA and Steambox, and there are actually other competing consoles that I had never even heard of that are coming out, are kind of like new school. And
Oculus.
Right, exactly. Oculus and the gatekeepers, they're really trying hard to make their jobs remain relevant. But I think that less and less they're becoming. I mean, the number of people who consider themselves gamers, like, thank you, Farmville, for like making a lot of gamers. The game was shitty, but you made a lot of people aware that these things exist. And now, people are using the same channels to make games. Like, I think that Mattie can talk about this best, but like, I think that it's not at all without the realm of possibility that the voices in this room, like your voices, are going to get a chance to be heard in games, because it's not about coding anymore. It's about the ability to tell a great story. And the thing about the people at this conference is that they have better stories to tell than you're somebody who's just never felt adversity.
Yeah.
And so it's going to take a while. Like, right now you can go out on Twine, and tomorrow you can launch your game on Twine. And it's going to take a long time for those things to get to the living room. But more and more, we're going to find that the hurdles to do that are lower and lower. The number of, people talk about like, oh, the store is too saturated. Like, we can't have more than 10 launches a year or whatever. That's not going to matter anymore. We have things called search boxes. And you can have these niches that rise where, fitting into that box that you're talking about, it's not going to matter anymore. We're going to make our new boxes. And it's just going to take a call to OUYA and say, hey, can we have a box called experimental? And it's going to happen. So it's going to take time, but I mean, maybe Mattie wants to talk about the process of, coming from thinking that game development was the thing for total geeks, and just realizing it's the thing for storytellers, maybe geeky storytellers.
Well, I mean, the thing, you kind of put it really well. It's like the thing with DIY game development tools is that there's less in the way of, so when you go to write something, even if it's gonna be a shitty poem, you don't have to think too much between putting your pen on the piece of paper and writing it, or putting implements onto a keyboard and typing it out. For games, you do. It's kind of like you're having existential thoughts about your arm, and then your fingers, and then the pencil, and then the paper, and you have to think about it, you have to kind of do it's just ridiculous to me. And with these other tools now, you just bypass all those things. And I think what's actually super interesting right now is the possibility for not only DIY games, but DIY game creation tools for like more people to be creating smaller, personal, weird tools for people to use that can very easily see being output to consoles. Like, do this and don't worry about how it works, but if you assign this, it's going to be the A button. Right. And do it. And, I don't really, I'm not the type of person who needs to know the artistry. I really hope that more people love the artistry of their makers, their tools, and their language, and be more experimental that way, because I would love to see some more code and tool like experimentation. But I think for me, what has been most interesting is that I can think something, a design, and then just put it into the game and just make it happen. I just want my design in there, and I don't have to worry about it. So if there's something that can make that happen for consoles, then why not? I can already imagine a whole bunch of really mean things I would do to people if I could get my hands on some way to have them do consoles. I'd make 5 people share one controller and make it awful for them to figure it out. So I think it would and that's all it takes, right? Like, if you can literally just have one action to that, then I'm pretty sure doing that is complicated. Like, I'm not even going to pretend that's easy. I have no idea how to do it. But I think if we can somehow figure that out, and maybe that might be, another avenue for this, is encouraging people to make new tools, and to make weird small tools, and just have an infinite amount of tools, and just have a search box for those. Like, what are tools that can help me put things onto a console? Great.
Well, what I love about what you're saying is really the more tools we have, and the shorter we can make that cycle between the idea and the implementation, the easier it becomes to create art.
Yes.
And that, but also, Robin, what you said about where's the money going to come from this is also something I think about. A lot is the balance between games as art and games as products. Yeah. I think that from the conversations I've had, the consoles are today all open to art and products, but the necessity for the creators, the artists, to have the financial support to be able to create the art in the first place and sustain themselves regardless, at least at a minimal level, if however well or not well the game sells. Like, those parts of that whole ecosystem are still not yet addressed.
No, and it's so important. I never, when I left graduate school, I was getting a PhD in computer science, and I left to go work on The Sims because it seemed like way more fun. When I left school and became a quote-unquote game designer, I was the same as you. I was like, no one's going to pay me to do this. I'm 32. I got my first job when I was 32. I'm a total fail. I was like, I got to do something with my life. This paper is meaningless. No one cares about dynamic difficulty adjustment in Half-Life. No one does. And then Left 4 Dead came out, and I was like, oh. Anyway, but when I left school, I never thought that I would be a CEO, but now I am. And one of my biggest jobs right now is to keep evangelizing the idea that when you make a video game and you get money from a publisher, there's a man-month rate. That's what they call it. Now you call it person month. It's it's your person month, but that's the monthly cost that you have to pay someone to say live in San Francisco, have coverage for healthcare, and make video games for a living. For me, it's $12,000 a month per person. That's a lot of money. If you have a team of 6 people, you do the math, that's a lot of money. But my job, one of my biggest jobs right now, is to go out and say, this is the amount of money that it is required for you to pay me to work with these very talented, loving, capable individuals so that I can afford to pay them health care. They can pay rent in San Francisco and support their 2 children and their wife, or their 2 children and their husband, or their boyfriend or their girlfriend, or just themselves. Living in the city is really expensive. But everybody here is amazing. We love living here. We love participating. And like that conversation about what a sustainable, fundamentally human way of making video games is like the conversation that I have more than anything else. Because people just expect you to suffer for your art. And it's like, I just don't believe that we should live in a society where if you want to create something that broadens people's experiences of pain or gives them a super joyful, wonderful moment, that you should have to starve and eat burritos for like 10 years.
I
just
like
don't
burritos.
think, yeah, I mean, yeah, I can burritos. But I just think we, as a society, we've reached a point now where we should be solving these problems, like collectively as a group, that people should be able to do what they want to do in a sustainable and human way. And video games should certainly not be an exception. You know, we shouldn't have to kill ourselves to do the things that we want to do.
Kickstarter's helping.
That's a good time to jump into the Kickstarter
Yeah.
part of the conversation. So I just want to state super clearly, I've done a Kickstarter for Centris. It was thankfully successful. And I want to encourage everyone in this room and everyone watching the video later, if you have an idea for a game and you think you might want to do a Kickstarter, you should definitely do a Kickstarter because it changed my life for the better in so many ways. I have to give you a laundry list of all the ways. Like, I mean, even sitting on this panel, I wouldn't be here if I hadn't done a Kickstarter. And the nice thing about it is there are people who want to support games and experiences of whatever kind. You know, 5 people sharing a controller. There's gonna be, you know, at least 1,000 people on the Kickstarter community that are like, that sounds awesome. Here's $20. You know, and it's also an exercise in getting attention on your work and getting some exposure and seeing, it's like a litmus test. How do people respond to this? And what kinds of questions come up? So, and maybe I didn't think of this, and how do I structure this, and how it helps me think about the game differently based on having an audience. Because the audience, like it's the new, maybe crowdfunding is the new, like the patron way, where you have a community of fans where they support your work because they like what you do. And then if your fan base grows, your capability of creating more different and even growing in spectacularity kinds of work, that also grows. And there's a bunch of analogies I want to draw to the music industry in the 1990s with like the grunge movement that exploded from the Pacific Northwest into the entire world. That happened for one reason because there was a lot of people hungry to listen to crazy stuff, a lot of people that were so emotional about their lives that they wanted to create stuff, and then you had this middle tier that connected those dots. And I think a lot about that ecosystem, how it applies to games, independent games in particular. And I didn't know if anyone else had any ideas about that, or
What do you mean the middle tier?
so like there's a great exhibit at the EMP in Seattle about Nirvana and the grunge movement, and there was these 3 roles. There were the fans, there were the musicians as artists, and then there were the labels, and there were the venue owners. So I mean, take fans out of that trifecta. The labels would sign the artists, and they would pay to have the albums made. They would produce the albums. Then they would make deals with the venues to bring in the artists. Like here's a bunch of sub pop artists playing this one venue. And then the fans would come and hear like, oh, I want to hear this band, but then I'm getting exposed to new bands. And the fans would spend money at the venues, so the venue owners made their money. The artists got paid for playing a show. The labels would sell the CDs that they funded. So like everyone made money and everyone was happy. And I'm super inspired by that. And I feel like there's room for, I don't know, kind of like video game concerts in a way. At GDC we have the Wild Rumpus,
Wild Rumpus
Venus
happens,
Patrol party, which to me is kind of the first example. But I don't know, are the games for sale there?
Not usually,
Okay.
and I think that one of the things that happens is as you try to merchandise and get those sorts of performances pushed more into that spectrum, then you have to think about insurance and all these other things,
Right,
and it ends up
right.
becoming a big deal. But I agree with you that the thing that's so cool about this, and we've talked about Funomena this way, is like, could we be like the equivalent of like a Sub Pop type label? Like, if we get through this first horrible period where we have to get all this funding and like do all this stuff, and we make a little money, our fans support us, we
Yeah.
get over the bump, then like, can we take a little percentage of that and then just start seeding it out? And
Yeah.
like, maybe it's just a tiny little grant to someone that lives here, someone that's going to school, like, just bump them, and then like they come on board and we feature them in our stuff. Maybe it's not even because we think they'll be commercially successful, but because it's going to just be able to showcase new voices. And I think the indie community, we're really lucky. Like, we all participate in a community that's really sort of family-like and very much promotes itself
Yeah.
in a way that's really great. And I think that maybe one of the differences we're talking about is the difference between the older version of community, which is sort of like an in-club thing, and this new one, and it's just about that hump. It's just about getting over the bump between being our community, where we're all supportive of each other, but we're just somehow not part of that community. Like, maybe it's about reaching out and colonizing it in a way.
And trying to bring it back to the console, the living room experience is we have, these consoles can do live streaming. So that's also kind of this weird dynamic where
Yeah.
you can have a group of people sitting in a room. Like, you can't have a big concert. You can have a house party, sure, play some console games, but then also sharing your experiences kind of in a broader sense. In the living room, I think there's a lot of room to disrupt and innovate there.
Super.
Yeah, and Double Fine and a couple other companies have done something what you're talking about. I've been wondering about the rise of possibly a model that's also similar to film, where you have film production studios, where an executive producer's role in many ways is to bring these pieces together. So to go out and find the money and find the right venues for it, because I think there is a lot more interest in helping to fund new voices and new games just within our own community, which is really great. But just there's not a lot of tools in place right now to like connect all the dots. And at Indie Fund, we just started working with a few scouts to help with the idea that we were kind of the submissions we were getting that were potential that we would fund were like kind of trickling down. And we thought, well, maybe it's the ways we're looking, and we're all developers ourselves, so everyone's super busy, and like maybe if we hire some people to find it stuff. And so far that it does seem to have been true. Like, the scouts are just pouring in tons of games that are really awesome. So I think that it does seem like there's room for that kind of financing to grow. Are there other people here from publishers or investors, funders?
Or just
this is
independent
just
billionaires
me.
or anything like that.
Because I had a question about that, which is like how, with me being on the publishing side now, like how can I feel similar to when I was in a position of hiring people for a development team, of like the games that come across my path to fund are the usual suspects, and like where do you guys think like someone in my position should be looking, like should be going out to, I mean, I'm here, which is like good, a big reason for it too, is like we want to not just say we're an open platform on OUYA, but like really work to cultivate that. What are other sources?
I'm kind of curious about so I'm currently funded through Patreon, mostly for my writing, not for my game development, but I guess I do both so simultaneously, so I guess it's for both. And I noticed that there are a lot of artists who are on Patreon and supported by the community who do lots of mini games, per month. Or are also doing things, I think of like Mara Copes, who's doing Forest Ambassador, and she gets money for that, but she also develops games on the side. And I guess, to be quite honest, my writing is funding my game. So I think a lot of people are funding their game making in a proxy way in order to sustain themselves, because right now, I don't expect any of the games I make to, give me millions of dollars, but I can write to an audience that I know likes me. So I think it's kind of interesting seeing, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately, because I am in, internet publishing right now is its own wild, scary animal that I won't get into, but it's basically no one is doing just their passion thing. You have to have some other subsidiary, thing that you're doing. And a lot of people I think are doing, trying to pour games into other mediums like writing, filmmaking, community making, things like that. Their play is starting to pour out because games itself is not handling it very well. So now the bucket's pouring out, but thankfully there are dried patches around the bucket of video games and other things are growing. So that's probably a way to look at that, because I think there is such, like right now, the video game industry is having a little bit of a too late of a reaction for a lot of artists. That right now, artists are like, well, I'm hungry right now.
I'm sick of this burrito right now.
I really like this burrito. And it's really hard to kind of wait for people to warm up to the idea of
waiting.
and so what has been happening instead is that we've been pitching games or game-like things other places. And so that's been a really interesting conversation. I've been seeing, our curation in weird places. I've been seeing games in activist spaces and using it for media activism. And that's always really interesting because you have like non-games people who really care about a subject trying to figure out games to use for their things. So you see like a whole wide range of ways that people are using play. So
one of the things that frustrates me though, and I was saying this to a friend of mine last night, like, if I go home, like my parents live in Central Florida, and we go to someone's barbecue and they're like, so what do you do? I'm like, I run a video game company. Like, what is in that person's mind? It is the side of a bus, and it's like an angry dude with like lasers coming out of his eyes, and like he's got fangs, and like a hoodie, and he's vaguely ethnically threatening, and he's angry, and he's shooting another guy and stabbing him at the same time. And it's like, that is so not what I do. Like, if you look at the side of a bus in the city and there's a game on it, that's what it is.
Right.
And like, one of the things that frustrates me, and the reason that I'm so passionate about releasing games, like, releasing games on the PlayStation Network, releasing games on OUYA, releasing games on Steam, releasing games on Oculus, getting different games into those spaces, is that like, I want my games to be on the side of a fucking bus. Like, I want people to see that on the side of the bus. I want them to see Katamari Damacy on a bus. I want them to see, like, super cute unicorn power party 5, gay on the side of a bus, and like, why does it have to be on the side of the bus, all this rage and like anger? Like, video games are not that, and they're so not that. We really have succeeded, except for the side of the bus. And so for me, it's like, this is the thing that we need to do. We need to colonize that damn bus.
I just always imagine, like, and so this comes up to kind of like the sustaining, artists over the time of making a game. Like, imagine if like the AAA industry were all like Twine games. Like, like Twine is
Totally.
AAA. Like, if you just kind of think about like the marketing there, but also just how easy it is to produce games, like relatively, right? Like, you don't need to dump millions of dollars into someone to make a cool like 48-hour Twine game that actually wrenches you in certain ways, right?
Yeah.
Like, the industry would just, I think about this often, just how different if our values were just placed elsewhere, how much like a lot of our problems will be solved. Like, you don't have to spend trillions of dollars on a game. You just don't have to do that anymore. But I think a lot of the things, especially when it comes to console, because console, I mean, to be quite honest, like the PC is obviously a piece of technology. I guess it's easy to forget that sometimes. Like, I'm just always on my PC. It just seems like an extension of my body now.
Well, it's a multi-use.
Right? Yeah, it's multi-use. And so consoles are kind of like this piece of technology that seems like, oh gosh, this is part of like, all this is going to cost a lot of money to do. So I think that, blurring that thing to say like, what, it's not really that anymore. Maybe, the price of admission is like actually really, really down and we don't have to worry about it. So, yeah.
I think it's taken a long time for games to be recognized as an emotional art form. Partly, just like what the game industry grew out of, technological limitations when the game industry started. I've made some games that, my last game took me 5 years to make. This current game, Extra Solar, $600,000 investment of my own money.
So
like, these are big games. The only game I've ever made that somebody came to me and said, your game made me cry, I made in a weekend. Yeah. It's a 5-minute game. You can play it for free at karmahs.com. And I think that as people warm up to the idea that creating emotional content or telling a good story or getting a player engaged doesn't actually require, like, super high-end Crisis Engine, participating medium light rays. That's not necessary to tell a great story. And I think that as the industry becomes aware of that, as our audiences become aware of that, I mean, we've talked a lot about the gatekeepers, but the audience is just as much a participator in this story as well. And our Facebook audiences are seeing that with the emergence of all these new kinds of games on Facebook and on your mobile devices. Those games are going to start having more and more emotional content in them, and it's going to make Farmville look pretty lame.
Share your crying games with your friends.
Yeah, I mean, I thought I was going to go back to the side of the bus story of like what I feel like right now what I see happening is that I have friends that engage in media in deep ways. They're the people that don't watch reality television. They watch HBO and Netflix series. They listen to indie music.
Yeah,
but then when they're playing a video game, they are playing Candy Crush Saga. And that's still like even when they come to games as a media, their concept of it is at a very
It's Doritos.
Yeah. And that. How do we puncture through that? And you said one point, which is like try and broadcast as much as possible the games that we're playing that we think.
Well, and they need to be marketed. Like it's fine if a content planner for a major platform says we would really like to have your game at launch because it's going to be different and we know it's valuable. But you have to have that conversation with them about like, will you help people find my game? Because it will not be easy for them to find it, but we know that it's going to be amazing when they do. So how do we have that conversation where you're helping me help them find it and give you money because you're going to take most of the money. So please help us.
One good thing there is that the curators are no longer just the people who are in charge of getting the media on the platform. People like Mattie are a curator.
Yes, that's
they
true.
run blogs, and we're seeing communities and clusters of games are kind of emerge around personalities and people. And that is going to change the system as well.
Well, I think curation is going to be more and more necessary going forward. I mean, if you look at mobile, the content overflow problem is absolutely real.
It's so real.
Finding a cool game on anyone's phone's app store is super hard. So through tools like Twitter and blogs, we find these things. The other part that I think is worth mentioning about mobile and Facebook is intention. So when I'm on my phone, I might want to play a game for 30 seconds while I'm waiting for the bus. If I'm on Facebook, I might be wanting to poke at Farmville while I'm like in between bits of a conversation. But when historically, when I sit down with a console, my intention is to sit and focus on a game. And even though the modern consoles have YouTube and Netflix and Amazon Instant Video and Twitch apps, so that there's still this like prestige of a gaming console. So we can probably assume that people that have these consoles and want to play games on their televisions are going to be more interested. They're going to own more games. They're going to put more time into their games, and they're probably going to be willing to pay more what the game is worth.
Yeah.
Like, people play games for free on their iPhone, and they throw it away because they don't like it.
That's definitely what we found.
Yeah. So
it's true. Yeah,
you
it
know,
was very validating.
yeah. So I mean, I think that if it's got a high quality experience on a console, $15, $20, up to $40, $50. However,
Yeah.
I don't know what's changing with price points for downloadable games. But
They're getting higher. I mean,
Yeah.
the problem is, of course, the store and accessibility. Like
Yeah.
with Journey, we were so successful, and I think we had no idea really how much people would want to reach out and try something different. And I think one of the conversations Kellee and I had a lot was, there is the perception that if you get a game for a console, it's going to take you 60 hours to play, and you're going to like smoke a big bowl, and then you're going to play it all day, and like, whoops, I didn't get to work today. Sorry, Call of Duty came out, whatever. But the perception is something that we also need to kind of fight. Like a game like Journey takes 2 hours to play through. You can play through it with your family, sitting around. It's totally safe. If you've never played a game before, you can still get through it. And that part of the conversation about how to market to those people, like, so hey, you have a PlayStation 3, like maybe your partner would love to play this game with you, and you could sit and have a conversation afterwards about the meaning of life, you know, like that's an awesome experience, but it's pretty hard to market to a community of people that expect it to be 60 hours long. And so I think this argument that you're making is a really powerful one. Like, it is a discerning community. They will invest in the art form because they've invested in the hardware. So if you invest in us and we do a high quality game with a relatively large budget for an indie, which is peanuts compared to a big title, you know, like we're so tiny. But if you put that little bit of money in, and you market it, you'll get so much more out of it in the long run. And I think my experience has been that the smaller titles made by larger publishers or smaller titles available on larger platforms don't get the marketing on the back end that would make them super profitable, and therefore that's shortchanging that cycle. So that's actually a really good thing. I think we have like 5 minutes.
I was going to say you've unlocked so many more questions for me, but I wanted to take a moment to see if there were questions from the audience. Yeah. I think someone's running up with a microphone to help.
It's Ness.
Hi there. So just really briefly, like my history with consoles, like my first console was a Super NES, and to me that was kind of the golden age. And consoles represented a very kind of social element, which as a nerdy, geeky, awkward, shy person growing up, that, you know, like that was what we bonded over. Like you said, GoldenEye and Smash Brothers. And I moved away from consoles because after college, it was so hard to find 4 people to sit.
Right.
It was impossible. And honestly, like
I'm on Facebook.
and there are games where you can do that online, but you know, then I have to put up with 13-year-olds who are homophobic and racist slurs. So I guess, like for me, I'm going back to the console now because I've gotten so tired. My entire life is on the computer, and sometimes I just want to break. But at the same time, what I want from consoles is that feeling of society, of community, that I'm with other people. And it could be my friends, it could be strangers. But I feel like consoles are trying to get there, but they haven't gotten there yet. And I was just wondering, what were your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, it's, I think the rise in development of local multiplayer games, especially in the independent development community. I mean, Matt Thorson, when he was working on Towerfall, spoke exactly to that point. Like, he wanted to get back to being able to share experience with his friends that sort of also unfolded over time. Like, the game is designed so you, in the old brawler way of like, you also figure out the tricks and discover new things and how to do different kinds of kills like together, and that's part of it too. And one of the barriers at the time when he was releasing that game was that the other consoles wouldn't distribute just a local multiplayer game, which I think we've seen also a big shift in. So that's part of it.
I think the shift in local multiplayer and just the new interest of experimenting with what is local multiplayer. Like, I think of like Button, and I think of Johann Sebastian Joust, and I think of like all these other things that are going on.
Nidhogg, Hokra.
There's a whole bunch of really interesting things going on with local multiplayer, and I think we're kind of maybe going to start seeing it like get to critical mass a little bit, maybe, like, you know, of a lot of people being interested in it. And I think it's maybe just we have to resell the idea of getting together in person, because I totally understand that everyone is too busy in San Francisco to like look at their face. But like, if there's a recontextualized reason to get together, like not let's go and play some video games, but like, we're gonna do some really like silly shit, you know, or something, or we're gonna do something very specific that makes it like we can only do this with a console.
You know, I was asked by a news outlet to list my top 5 games from the last console generation over this week. So I spent a lot of time thinking about what were the games that I spent the most time with, and man, Rock Band, I cannot tell you how many amazing experiences I've had with friends playing that game, drinking beers, just hanging out after work. We had it at work, and we would just stay at work late, like lots of us, just because it was there, and it had the big room and the big sound system. It was so cool. Like, I love that performance aspect of being in the living room. And there's also the other thing is just like family. Like, people have kids, especially now. People raise their kids. They spend a lot of time with their kids. What could be a better way to spend time with your family than all of you participating in a video game together in front of the console where you're discovering it? You know, that would be great.
I know we're going to have to tie up soon, so in the interest of maximizing our diversity of voices who are making games, everyone on this panel is super accessible. Most of us are going to be around for the full weekend. Come up to us, tell us what game you want to make. We will tell you what tool to use and where to get started. It is really that easy.
It is.
Awesome.
Questions?
That's it?
Yeah? I think we have time for a couple of questions. Yeah.
Oh no,
Oh,
we ran over.
We'll take care of it later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.